What's up, everybody? Welcome on into another edition of Showtime Live. We were in the East Coast last week, now on the West Coast, the left coast, maybe the best coast. Ira Schoffel, the namesake, joining us here from Anaheim, California, as Florida State gets prepared for their Sweet 16 rematch against Gonzaga. Ira, how are you, man?
I'm good. Glad to be back in my hotel room. We spent the day over at the Honda Center in lovely Anaheim. I'm not that far. I'm about probably 4 or 5 miles away, but it takes about 20, 25 minutes to get here from there because this is California and that's how they roll. But yeah, it was a productive day. We got to watch a little bit of practice, a little bit of shoot around, had interviews with basically anybody who wanted to on the team. Talked to Coach Hamilton, several of the players, listened to Gonzaga's players, and ready for some basketball tomorrow.
I hear you, man. What was the prevailing feeling, I guess, around the team, whether it was maybe not even so much the team? How about the people out there covering, I guess, both Florida State and Gonzaga? Does it feel like Florida State has garnered and earned the respect of the national media and the folks, or is this simply another obstacle in the way of Gonzaga on their way to being coronated as national champions, perhaps?
I mean, I think Gonzaga out here is still the story, and I think but it focuses on Florida State because Florida State eliminated them last year. So that's kind of the talk from a lot of the media. A lot of the questions directed at the Gonzaga players was about how motivated they are to knock Florida State after what happened last year and get some revenge and redemption. And their players kind of played into that a little bit and said that that players from last year's team who aren't there anymore are calling and texting and reminding them how badly they want this win. And the current players said it was a big deal to them. So, and I think also from a standpoint of, I think for those players, they feel, I think, like they got punked a little bit by Florida State last year. They felt like Florida State was more physical, more aggressive. And a couple of players made comments about that they want to show what the real Gonzaga is. So I still think most of the attention's on Gonzaga out here, but with a Florida State reference and how they're trying to get revenge.
I got you. What was the feeling like around Florida State? I saw the transcript from the press conference. I know you spoke to them in the locker room too. I guess outside of having to field questions about Phil Kofer and his status, obviously he won't be with the team this weekend, but how he's impacted them. What's been the questions surrounding Florida State today when they were able to speak to the folks in the media? What were the questions that folks seem to be posing to them as they get prepared for this game?
There's a lot of Phil Kofer talk, as you'd imagine. From a perspective of, you got a lot of people out here, media-wise, that hadn't had a chance to cover this story because it happened before they came out here. And I think CBS, you could tell CBS's crew was spending a lot of time. I imagine you're going to see a lot of Phil Kofer coverage during that game against Gonzaga, before the game and after the game and during the game. They interviewed a lot of players. Charlton Young, the assistant coach, who's closest to Phil, they had a long interview with him about it. Leonard Hamilton spent a lot of time talking to Dana Jacobson, their sideline reporter. So I think that's going to be a focus of their coverage. So there were a lot of questions about that. Otherwise, it was mostly questions about Gonzaga. And, again, because we're out here, this is how it was. They played Gonzaga and they won. All the media out here, most of the media out here, everybody other than Florida State contingent was focused on Gonzaga. And so when Florida State won that game, they went in their post-game press conference. Very few of the media were there. They all went to Gonzaga's locker room to kind of get reaction to this stunning loss for Gonzaga. And some people at FSU and the administration were not happy that there were really no media in the press conference because the Florida State reporters usually will go to the Florida State locker room because we can get the press conference transcripts, like you said, later from ASAP Sports. So we all go to that locker room. All national media who would normally go to the press conferences went to Gonzaga's locker room. So it was kind of weird. Like Florida State beat Gonzaga, and they went to the press conference, and there were very few questions about it because everybody's focused on Gonzaga. So, I think that's kind of how it is right now. There are a lot of questions about Gonzaga. I probably heard every player asked at least once, probably several times, about how different Gonzaga looks now compared to the team last year. And obviously they added the Clark kid, and Tilly wasn't healthy last year. So that's, we've mentioned it, we've written about it. You mentioned it on Wake Up War Chant. So it's got to be mentioned, but I'm sure the kids are a little bit tired of hearing about it. Yeah, it's a different Gonzaga team. Okay, they get it.
Right. He's managing editor Ira Schoffel, joining us live from Anaheim, California. I'm Aslan Hajavandi, director of digital media for WarChant.com. If you're not a member of the Ultimate Seminole Sports Source, use the promo code WarChant30 for 30 free days of access to WarChant.com. Ira, one of the things I don't want to say concerned about, but it's just, I think what Florida State was able to do last year, you mentioned them maybe taking the fight to Gonzaga, outmanning them, and just out-physicaling them. I don't know how much of that stemmed from kind of, Florida State being able to take their medicine from Xavier the year before and then redeem themselves against Xavier and keep that sort of emotion going. And I don't know how much of Gonzaga's sort of effort tomorrow night is going to be based on what happened last year, but is there any sort of feeling around the team or talk to the players that what happened last year, they're able to kind of harness that again this year, and they're not losing any of that sort of desire because they know they took down a team like Gonzaga last year?
Well, I don't think they did anything Herculean by beating Gonzaga. I mean, I think that's kind of the overriding theme. I think talking to Florida State's players and coaches, not that they're overconfident, but when you play in the ACC and you play Duke and Carolina and Team Virginia and teams like that, when you go play a team like Gonzaga and you play the way the way you have to play during the regular season, they feel like that's probably up a notch from what a lot of other teams do. I mean, look, this isn't to put down Gonzaga's conference, but the reality is reality. There's a reason they go, it seems like 16-0 every year or 17-1 or whatever, however many league games they play. They only, a lot of times go undefeated, lose 1 or 2 league games. They're not challenged week in and week out the way ACC teams are, or SEC teams, or Big Ten teams. I mean, it's just the reality of it. So I don't think Florida State felt like they did anything crazy in that Gonzaga game. They just did what they do, and Gonzaga didn't respond. Now, it's up to Gonzaga whether they can respond. I would say this, a lot has been made about Clark's big game, and I'm writing a story about this later tonight about Florida State's defense against post players. But, the Clark kid had 36 points against Baylor. If you go back and watch that film, I mean, Baylor kind of let him do whatever he wanted to do. I mean, he caught the ball on the block. He caught the ball on the wing. He caught the ball in the paint. I mean, wherever he wanted to get the ball, he got it. He didn't get boxed out on rebounds. I mean, he had a great game. He's a nice player. He's a very athletic player, but literally was kind of unmolested, unchecked in that game. And so I think from Florida State's perspective, when you think about the pressure they put on the ball for 94 feet, you think about the length that they have on the perimeter to kind of obstruct passing lanes and get tips and deflections, then the effort that they and the bodies that they could throw at guys inside to limit touches to the post, they feel like they can neutralize a lot of what Gonzaga does. So I think Florida State's I think they respect Gonzaga, especially the shooting. They've got a lot of guys that can shoot the basketball from really 1 through 5, but they also, I think, feel confident that what they did last year is kind of what they're going to do this year. It's going to be up to Gonzaga where they respond better.
I like how you mentioned you don't think that Florida State is thinking that they accomplished something Herculean by beating Gonzaga last year. The national media spoke about Ja Morant, and deservedly so, about how talented he was and how much of a threat Murray State would be. And then Florida State harnesses the emotion of what Phil was going with to put together such an impressive performance. Is there any fear of maybe an emotional letdown? Did the Florida State playoff, did they hit the afterburners and tap into their adrenaline last week in taking down Murray State, that having to come back from Hartford to Tallahassee for, I don't even know how long were they back in Tallahassee, 48 hours just to get back on a plane and go to Anaheim, California, could fatigue, not even on the physical level, but an emotional sort of level, be at play tomorrow, do you think?
I think it's got to be a concern. And I think if you're Leonard Hamilton, coaching staff, I think you're paying as much attention to that as you are anything else. I think that what we saw in that game against Murray State, Florida State's a better team than Murray State, but the way they played and how just the ferocity they played with and the emotion they played with, I think it was unleashed emotion from the whole Phil Kofor situation, plus all the hype about Ja Morant and kind of going into that game. I wonder about this. Now, this is a different dynamic. It's a few days later. Phil's not with the team. He's not on the sideline. He's not going to be in the huddles. They do have an open locker room for him. They have an open locker for him with his name on it in the locker room, but he's not with them right now. Having said that, though, they are still playing for him and his family and Mike Kofor, who passed. So that's still a very big motivation. But yeah, you don't know how it's going to, carry over. And this is a tricky, window of time these last 4 or 5 days. And from what they did, from what it sounds like, after the game on Saturday night, they flew back to Tallahassee on Sunday. They basically had almost 2 days to kind of recover, go in and get treatment, talk a little bit. They didn't have a lot of team sessions. They gave the players the film of Gonzaga's most recent games so they can watch on their laptops and tablets and try to watch it on their own. Then they came together yesterday and had a practice back in Tallahassee. And they met in Tallahassee. They did film work. They flew out to California yesterday. And so and today was a real good practice day. But yeah, I think they've kind of taken it kind of light from a physical standpoint this week. And but there's no doubt the coaching staff is really paying attention to see how they respond to it because, again, they were on that super emotional, I wouldn't say an emotional high, but just very charged emotionally. And now, you'll have to see how they are 4 or 5 days later.
Physically, I imagine Terrence Mann still, dealing with the bone bruise he's had to manage this entire season. Obviously, Trent Forrest and his toe has slowed him down. He hasn't been anywhere near 100%, but he still gives everything he has and has been very effective for Florida State. Health-wise, any other developments? I know David Nichols is somebody that obviously folks have been having an eye on and some concerns about.
Yeah, that's probably the only other kind of newsworthy development is David Nichols. We actually spoke to the players before we talked to the coaches, and I spoke to David Nichols, and I saw him walking around in the shoot-around and shooting a little bit. He seemed to be okay, but he wasn't running. And then when we spoke to the players first, he told me he felt a lot better than he did on Saturday, and when he couldn't play against Murray State, and he thought it would be a game-time decision, but he felt a lot better, and he was making progress. Then we talked to Leonard Hamilton, and he basically was like, yeah, unless he has a miraculous recovery, he's not going to be playing. So I believe Leonard. I mean, a week ago this time he was telling us that Phil Kofer might not be able to play because of his foot, and sure enough, he didn't play in that Thursday game. So if Nichols can give you anything, it's a bonus. And, those two injuries are significant. I mean, it's two seniors. Neither one is going to be carrying the load for you offensively, probably not on most nights, but there are more bodies you can throw at the situation. So now maybe you have to see more minutes again out of Raquan Gray, who played really well on Saturday, maybe more minutes out of Devin Vassell, maybe more minutes out of Polite, who played well last weekend. So they have options. It's not like it's debilitating, but you lose two key players. It's concerning.
Does Florida State have to play above their head tomorrow night to beat Gonzaga, or do you feel like if they have they craft their game plan and stick to their game plan and play the defense the way they can, hit shots the way they did against Murray State to a certain degree? I don't know if they'll shoot that well again, but it won't take something out of this world, or Florida State doesn't have to find some sort of special gear to beat Gonzaga, or does it seem like there's so many different options for the Bulldogs that the Florida State really is going to have to step up their game more so than any point?
I really think it's going to all come down to Florida State's defense and how well they play defensively. I think they will do a good job of limiting the post touches for Gonzaga's big guys. They've got two really nice post players. I think two or three. I think Florida State will do a nice job in there. I think that they'll do a good job in transition of slowing Gonzaga down. So Gonzaga actually likes to run some. I think Florida State will defend that well. The big question is going to be whether or not they can get out on all those shooters and contest those shots, and whether or not Gonzaga knocks them down. I mean, part of being a team that can shoot the ball well is you have to hit contested shots. So I think if Gonzaga has a great night from three-point range, I think Florida State's going to have a tough time. But I think if Florida State plays great defense, they're going to need one of the better defensive efforts of the year. I think they can affect Gonzaga enough to keep Gonzaga's offense from getting off. And I think Florida State's going to do enough. I wouldn't be super concerned about Florida State scoring against Gonzaga. I think their athleticism, I think Trent Forrest, I think the ability to hit the offensive glass. I think Florida State did a really good job in the offensive glass against Gonzaga last year. Both teams actually did. But I think Florida State's going to score. I think they're going to do fine offensively. My biggest question is, can they get out on the shooters and avoid a big night there?
We spoke to ESPN analyst Dallin Cuff, and he said that he thought the three keys for Florida State. And this is the weird thing about, talking about football. I feel like when we talk about keys of the game, there's some more nuance than basketball, although it comes down to don't turn the ball over and things like that.
Establish the run.
Yeah, exactly. His three things were basically, if Florida State can shoot the way they did against Murray State, which, I mean, it was phenomenal. I mean,
Yeah.
PJ Savoy, the lift he gave them was incredible. Raekwon Gray as well, obviously. If they can shoot the ball well again, if they can do well on the offensive glass, apparently Gonzaga struggles to be a defensive rebounding team, and then obviously protect the ball. Those were the keys. He said that he thought would help prove for Florida State to win. And I guess those are things that they've continued to focus on. Obviously, you always want to shoot well, but taking care of the ball for them and then crashing the glass, especially when they're on offense, those are things they can accomplish, and they have the skill set for it, though, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the thing about shooting the ball well, I think Florida State, what you saw in the second game against Murray State versus the first game was a lot of those shots were in rhythm. Raekwon Gray, those threes he hit early, even PJ Savoy's, they were, they got the pass where they were expecting it. They were able to step into it, really shoot it with confidence. FSU's got guys that can shoot the ball, but they're not necessarily a lot of guys, other than Savoy, it's not a lot of guys who are going to hit the crazy three-pointers, like where they're dribbling to one side and fading away from the basket and knocking down threes like some unbelievable shooters can. That's not really these guys. These are guys that need to kind of be in rhythm, square it up to the basket, and they can knock down threes. So I think if the offense is working, I think you'll see him shoot the ball well. You could probably point to a million different, keys. I mean, we picked 3 keys because it, just like in football, like you said, it sounds like something, magical. This is the key to unlock the victory. But the reality is, there's a lot of things they can do well. As you said before, do I expect Florida State to have to play great or above their head? I certainly don't. I think it's going to be interesting. Again, to me, this game is going to be a lot more about Gonzaga and how they respond. If you look back at last year, I was looking at the play-by-play from last year. Florida State in that game, when you talk about the three-point shooting, it was Florida State got out to a good lead. Gonzaga fought back. It was a close game. And then right before halftime, C.J. Walker hit a 3. P.J. Savoy hit a 3. I think they got another basket. And all of a sudden, Florida State's up 8 at halftime. And Gonzaga, that kind of knocked them back. And, again, I think that Florida State, if I had to guess who's going to be the more aggressor and who's going to kind of throw the first punch, especially physically, I think it's going to be Florida State. And it's going to be up to Gonzaga. Even though they're the number 1 seed, I think they have a little bit more to prove here that they can play a style of basketball.
Yeah. Hey, let's take some questions since we are on YouTube Live. Ira, this one comes from AK Dogs. He asks whether or not Kabengele, you think, will play 30 or more minutes tomorrow night against Gonzaga.
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, that would be way up there for him to play over 30 minutes. But he's been playing great. He's a good matchup. He's probably a better matchup for Gonzaga's bigs. They're athletic than Kumaji. But I think Kumaji has played really well. I mean, I think he's played really well the second half of the season. So I think they'll do what they do. I think Kumaji will start early. What you did see in the last game I thought was really interesting was Kumaji did not get off to a good start in that game. And Leonard actually, Coach Hamilton went to Kabengele before the first media timeout, which he never does. So most of the time, Kabengele sits till the first media timeout and maybe a little bit after that. But about 3 minutes in, Coach Hamilton was like, "Oh, we got to get Fee in," and he played real well right off the bat. And so I think you could be leaning that way. It's going to be up to Kumaji. If I think Hamilton would like to play him, but if he sees in the first 3 or 4 minutes that he can't play against those guys, especially like Tilly, one of their bigs that really shoots it well from outside. There's some matchups that will not favor Kumaji. And if he doesn't do well, then I think you might see Kabengele a lot more, especially with Kofor out as well.
These are some questions that came on Renegade Express, Ira, for Corey and I for Wake Up War Chant, but they're basketball related, and you're in Anaheim right now, so I figured why not ask you. This comes from Enol_2000, and he says, I know national championship in baseball and basketball for the Noles would be very welcomed, indeed, if either were to happen at some point, or both for that matter. However, curious as to which would be more meaningful if only one of the following scenarios occurred, Ira. So here we go. What would be more meaningful? Baseball team wins a national title, but it happens under the next coaching staff, or the basketball team wins it all, but it comes under this coaching staff.
I mean, I don't think there's any question it's basketball. And to be honest with you, I mean, from a sentimental standpoint, I think most FSU fans would love Mike Martin to get a national championship, and I get that. But in the grand scheme of things, college baseball doesn't have anything like
No,
March Madness. I
not
mean,
at
it's
all.
just not. It's from a parochial standpoint. I get that people would love to see Mike Martin win a national. It means a lot to them, and Florida State baseball means a lot to Florida State. But I mean, from an overall program standpoint, I don't think you compare college baseball to college basketball, and the impact it would have on the program. I mean, you win a national championship in basketball. Uh, I just, what that would do in terms of elevating the program is you almost can't even measure it. Whereas college baseball, that's the way that thing is set up, and it seems like the way baseball is played, and then the way that format is set up. I don't know that the best team seen is the best team. The team that wins all rarely seen as the best team, and I don't think it does as much for you. So love to see Mike Martin get it, but overall, I think there's no question it's basketball.
Yeah.
What about you?
Um, what would be more meaningful, I think, is if Leonard Hamilton wins it, just because, the column that Corey wrote the other day, I'll be honest, when you're talking about 4 years in a row that you haven't made the tournament, you're in your late 60s as a head coach. Again, like, I understand basketball's lane at Florida State University, so I was never upset that they retained Leonard Hamilton, but I wouldn't have thought it'd be a bad idea if they would have looked for somebody else, try to get some young up and coming coach from a mid-major, try to get something out of the Shaka Smart mold. But look at Shaka Smart in Texas. Look at Rick Barnes in Tennessee right now. So kudos to whoever you want to give the tip of the cap and the sort of responsibility for that happening. People want to praise Stan Wilcox, I guess deservedly so. But yeah, man, you win a national title in basketball, March Madness. My explanation is, Florida winning a national title in baseball before Florida State was like a huge insult, right? Just for the amount of what baseball means to Florida State, Mike Martin's place in the game and all that. And 3 days later, I was just like, I got all dramatic and tweeted, I can't believe this happened. This is so ridiculous. I'll never forget about this. And then 3 days later, I'm like, the sun came up, whatever. But to win a national title in basketball, although I know that school has already got 2 of those, it would be huge. I mean, much, much more meaningful to win a national title in basketball. Hands down. Next question for you, Ira, comes from DWolf1. Big fan of the show, Wake Up War Chant. But this one too. We're in the fledgling state of this one, Ira. It's gonna take off and overtake everybody.
I am too, DWolf.
He says he appreciates all the work that we've been doing covering the basketball team and all the articles. He's under the impression and wants to know if you're of the belief that if Florida State can get past this very good Gonzaga team, they'll just find the sheer will to win a tight game, whether it's against Michigan or Texas Tech, to get to the Final Four. I think, if Florida State, I think it's a 2-for-1. You beat Gonzaga, I think you'll win on Saturday and you're heading to your first Final Four since 1972. But I don't know, maybe I'm being too optimistic.
No, I mean, I'm kind of with you. I mean, I think Florida State, they're from an emotional standpoint. Again, I think it's going to play out a little bit similar to last week. Not that Florida State's going to look past Gonzaga or not be totally dialed into Gonzaga, and I'm going to just go ahead and keep saying Gonzaga, just going back and forth.
It's Zaga. I'll keep saying Gonzaga, so that'll keep you free
right
from the hate.
But it's to me, I don't know that the emotions are going to be as I don't know. I just think that Elite Eight game is something that has stuck in their craw since it happened against Michigan. And whereas Gonzaga, I guess, they're saying that they've got Florida State is the big game that they know they have to get past because of what happened last year. I think Florida State feels the same way about Michigan. So I think if Florida State gets past Gonzaga, I like their chances. I mean, I really like their chances in the next game. And whoever they play, but especially if it's Michigan. I just think that they were so devastated by that last year. I almost can't conceive of how they would let themselves lose. Again, I think they'll play at an unbelievably hard level. They always play hard, but I think it would be at an unbelievably hard level the next round if they were that close to the Final Four again and only had Michigan between them.
This question comes from Isaac Hart over on YouTube. Asks if Gonzaga has decent depth. And I'll take this because I already had some research done for Wake Up War Chant, which you folks should all listen to. They had 4 guys that played 35 or more minutes against Baylor. They had 8 players in total see action in that one. And then Killian Tilly was nowhere near as effective against Baylor as he was in their first game against Fairleigh Dickinson. So yeah, they're going to keep it to about probably, they're going to play 8 guys, but their scoring is going to come from about 5 of those guys, where Florida State's going to spread it out. I mean, I think Gonzaga's got 4 starters that average at least 15 or more points. So somebody I think asked Leonard that today. Basically, can you use your Murray State blueprint and how you slow down John Morant to beat Gonzaga? But he said they've got a better team than Murray State, so they can't follow that sort of blueprint. But in terms of like the droves that Florida State runs out there and guys that can just come out of nowhere, like maybe this will be Devin Vassell's turn to have a big game after PJ Zavoy and Raekwon Gray survive. So I don't think their depth is nearly as talented and versatile as Florida State's. But the guys they do have are used to logging these minutes, but are they used to logging these sort of minutes against this kind of competition that's going to come at them fresh-bodied and freshly rotated? To your point from earlier, Ira, iron sharpens iron. Playing in the ACC, we'll see if Gonzaga can handle that sort of intensity for 40 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, we use minutes as the judge for, I guess, how conditioned you are, how many minutes you can play in terms of stamina. But minutes are not all created equal. And if you're playing in a league, and I talked to Charlton Young, FSU's assistant coach, today about this, and it's going to be my story about the defense. But there's kind of the way he put it, in most college basketball games across the country, there's kind of a gentleman's agreement where we're going to let you walk it up the court and get into your offense, and you're going to let us walk it up the court and get into our offense. And that's how Florida State plays. And they are going to pressure the ball for 94 feet. And I think you saw it with Morant. I mean, I thought Morant got worn down in that game because it's a lot. It's a lot of pressure. And they're not even trying to get steals. They're not trying to take the ball from you. It's not like 40 minutes of hell necessarily, but it's just a constant wear that kind of wears teams down. So, yeah, those guys have played 35 minutes. I don't know if they played it at this style. I'm guessing in their conference they didn't have a lot of teams that were just guarding them 94 feet. And then the question is, if those guys get a little fatigued, who are they bringing off the bench? Because they haven't had to rely on their bench as much as Florida State does. Again, I would love Florida State's chances with David Nichols and Phil Kofer, because now that's 2 more guys you're throwing at them. Florida State's not quite 100%, but I still think their depth's going to be an advantage.
It's crazy to me that they were able to do that against Murray State and then get minutes for guys like Anthony Polite. Like, I don't know how invaluable that is, but I have to imagine that if they'll probably have to turn to Polite, especially if Nichols can't play, just to keep bodies out there and keep guys fresh. Just how important it was to be able to get guys like him, real important minutes in the tournament. Yeah,
I don't think Coach Hamilton's going to be as cavalier this time, in the sense of, he's not going to put out that 1-5 that he put out there for 3 or 4 minutes, because in a game like against Gonzaga, you could find yourself down. If it's a close game and you do that, you might find yourself down 8 points by the time you get your key guys back in. So, I do think he'll rotate guys here and there. Maybe you get a little bit more minutes from Trent Forrest, Terrence Mann, Pete Cabangeli, as Guy mentioned earlier. I think all those other guys are going to rotate a lot. I think you're going to see. I think you'll see Polite, because again, even Florida State's bench players, that guys who are not key scorers, almost all of them can defend, and they're athletic and they're long. So you're throwing bodies at them, even if you don't want those guys to score, they're going to be effective on the defensive end.
Ira, I'll let you. You're the moral compass of the website and the entity that is warchant.com. Is talking about the Final Four right now, is that like in poor taste to project and think about what that'll mean? Because we've had some questions about, and I know historical importance, we usually defer to Corey, especially when it comes to football, but basketball, I think we're pretty much all on the same plane, or at least you and Corey are. I'm getting a bunch of questions on YouTube basically about, if this team makes it to the Final Four, where does that place them in terms of all-time basketball teams at Florida State? Like, does that make them better than the 72 team that made it to the finals? Or should we not talk about that? Like, I don't want to jinx it per se, but I mean, we're here. There's something I think you can probably talk to about it better, because you're there right now. When you make it to this weekend, when you make it to the second weekend, you're one of only 16 teams left. When it's 64, it's mass chaos. But I feel like when there's only 16 teams left and you've made it to this weekend, there's just a different sort of air and feeling and prestige around making it this far.
Well, yeah, I don't think there's any question. And and the margin now is so thin. It's like I was talking to Stan Jones, one of the other assistant coaches, about Gonzaga, and he was just like, "Look, man, anybody you play right now is got great players. I mean, there's nobody here, especially this year, where there's no Cinderellas. Right. Anybody that's here has great players. They've got some depth. They're well coached, and everybody's gonna be a tough out. And I think they're all, for the most part, pretty equal. So, yeah, I think Florida State's got as good a chance as anybody. And what it would mean, I think, if Florida State got back to the Final Four in this era of college basketball, to me, I actually think it probably does mean more. Just because of what college basketball has become, it was not this. The sport was not to this level back when Florida State made its run in the early '70s. It was a great run, it's tremendous. Those guys deserve tons of respect. But I think at the competition level in college basketball today, the number of teams, the parity, the fact that the tournament's bigger. I mean, I think all those reasons. I think going to the Final Four today is a greater accomplishment. But I'd be interested to hear what like the players. It's funny. Stan Jones made this comment earlier the week that I thought was kind of surprising, but I kind of know what he meant. He even said, to some degree, getting to the Final Four, it's almost as good as winning a national title or playing for a national title, because the Final Four is just there is something there's a mystique about going to the Final Four. You have that whole week where nobody's talking about anything else except those four teams, and you have the big games on Saturday night, and so it would be enormous. And and again, I think that's the beauty of being at this point is all 16 teams realize how close they are.
I got chills there when you talked about that, man. Like Final Four weekend. I haven't even thought about Final Four weekend. I'm so excited about making it this far. So, like, will we do rock, paper, scissors? Somebody, Rully for FSU, said on Tribal Council we should do a game of horse between Corey and I to determine who gets to go to Minneapolis with you, because you got to keep this thing rolling if we make it there, man.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think maybe Gene will send everybody. We'll send the whole posse. But yeah, no, it would be great. It would have been nice if they had played Jacksonville last year. We could have more people there, but they got sent off to the cold Northeast and now out west. And it's funny. I mean, from a prestige standpoint or a respect standpoint, I think Florida State's players are kind of embracing the fact that they keep getting shipped all over the country, and it's 2 years in a row they get sent out west. And I think if they get to the Final Four, the way they're going to savor it to such a degree, because they didn't get gifted the trip that a lot of. I mean, Gonzaga, where did Gonzaga play their first two rounds? Was it like Salt Lake City or something?
I think so. I'll research that.
It wasn't out east.
Yeah, no.
And now they're playing in California, just like last year they got to play in California. So I think Florida State kind of is embracing that. And if they got to the Final Four, I think Gene might have to send the whole crew. I mean, could you imagine how big that? Of course, you got the spring game.
Yeah,
on Saturday
slight problem.
Yeah.
We're having a spring football game because we didn't have a bowl game this year, so we started practicing in the middle of March. Oh man, that'll be like the sum of all fears. They were actually talking about it at practice today with the Florida State football spokesperson. They were talking about what do you do at a school like this if you make it that far in the tournament when you have like a spring game going. I mean, obviously they're not gonna change anything at this point, but it would be like poor Willie Taggart needs a break, right? Like hopefully he doesn't have to share. I don't know. Hopefully he does share. I don't want to wish bad ill on the basketball team for him, but like imagine that. Like he's got his brand new shiny offensive coordinator ready to run out his tempo offense, and then he can't even display it to all of us because we're stuck to our TVs watching the game. So we'll see how that goes. I had a question. I was going to find out where Gonzaga played last round, but I started talking about that nonsense. A question here again from YouTube as we start winding things down. Thomas Coker asks Ira, may we discuss individual matchups? Is there anything to keep an eye on? I mean, I don't know who matches up on Hachimura or what they want to get accomplished against him, and obviously Brandon Clark, what he did against Baylor. I don't know if you try to have Kabengele knock him off his spot, or you're going to roll Raekwon Gray. Do you think there's maybe one or two I don't want to say matchups like he asked particularly, but two players that Florida State should focus on, or who's going to have to bear the brunt of the defensive effort for the Noles tomorrow?
I mean, I really like, Coach Hamilton said, I'm not trying to deflect it, but I mean, like Hamilton said, I mean, they are a pretty balanced team, and it's not like John Morant where you just take away that guy and take away the head of the snake. I think you look at, I think Florida State matches up well with those guys, Hachimura, and you look at Terrence Mann, Raekwon Gray, Kevin Gilly. They've got some guys who have length and athleticism to rotate on some of those guys. I think the point guard matchup is going to be really good. They've got a really good point guard, a very experienced point guard. Florida State obviously is Trent Forrest. I think that's probably as good a matchup as you'll see. And I think that it's funny. Leonard Hamilton said that he thought Tilly, even though he comes off the bench, might be the most dangerous of the three post players because of the way he shoots the ball. So that there's different. Gonzaga's got different ways that they can attack you. They run sets, they score in transition, they play inside out a lot. They're going to get the ball. They're going to try to get the ball inside the post and then find their shooters. But Florida State's kind of designed defensively to stop that. So at least eliminate as many of the post touches. I just think, to me, from if I was going to watch one thing to say, okay, Florida State does this well, that they've got a really good chance, it's going to be limiting those post touches to Clark, to because to disrupt what they want to do, what Gonzaga wants to do offensively. Because again, I watched some of that Baylor game and it was ridiculous how Gonzaga just got to run their offense whenever they wanted and had no disruption at all. If Florida State's disrupting what Gonzaga tries to do offensively, I think Florida State's going to have a great game because I think Florida State's going to score pretty well.
I should just let you go out on top. I think you said Gonzaga correctly like 4 times in a row. So proud of you, man. Do you want to gander a guess, a prediction for tomorrow night's game, or just stay nice and neutral and just you're going to enjoy a great game?
I think Florida State's going to win it, unless Gonzaga.
Let's go.
Unless they just shoot the lights out. I think Florida State's going to win the game. I think Florida State, what you saw last year, I think is the difference in these programs. I think Florida State is set up to disrupt those kinds of offenses. I think their physicality, their length, their aggressiveness, assuming that they can maintain from an emotional standpoint what they had last weekend. I think Florida State's going to win the game. I don't know if it's going to be 15 points, but I like Florida State to win the game.
And I like this. I saw you tweeted this earlier, with Killian Tilly saying we didn't show them the real Gonzaga last year. It's going to be a very different team this year, and we're going to try to go right or hard the right way. So that's good. So if Florida State knows, like, they're prepared for the storm coming at them, and they'll be able to handle it quite well. They've been there. They've done that. Do you want to ask me anything about football practice? Do you miss football practice at all?
Did we play Nuck If You Buck?
Yes. Knoll drill.
That was good.
Interestingly enough, it's like 3 levels. It's offensive linemen versus defensive linemen, tight ends versus linebackers, and then receivers, DBs. There's a lot of linebackers on offensive linemen today. Like Adonis Thomas, Josh Brown went head-to-head against like Chaz Neal and I think Jalen Goss. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, I don't know where that all came from, but that's something to think about.
Not to be negative, but like what percent of Florida State's chances for success this season on the field will relate back to the Knoll drill?
I did hear Randy Clements when they were breaking out into individual segment work, linemen with their coach, receivers with Ron Dugans, etc. He started trailing away from me, so I faintly heard him, but he did say something about they want to get in front of the guys, hips, hands, and then move forward. You want to do it something like, he was referring to Knoll drill. He's like, just like in Knoll drill, and then his voice trailed off. So apparently there's some sort of synergistic effect we're hoping from what's being accomplished while Nuck If Your Buck is playing and what's going to happen in Jacksonville.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm sure there's little pieces of it that apply. I don't know. I mean, you see a lot of running around blocks. You see a lot of, and again, I mean, you can't simulate what real football is. I mean, you're these one-on-one matchups. You're not, and trying to make a play on a ball carrier, that's not really what you're doing most of the time in football. Most of the time in football, you may be taking on a block so that somebody else can fill a gap. Anyway,
Well,
I don't know. I'm
maybe
not a huge fan, but
maybe Kendall Briles, Ira, will just have such good spacing in his spread that it will be just this canal of just just one level, just straight ahead, stay within a 5 yard alley and then bust it up the middle. So we'll see how that goes. We had a brief viewing window. Nothing crazy injury-wise. It looks like Jaden Lars Woodby is still limited with his shoulder injury. I do wonder if that's what he sustained against Samford last year and played through. Emmett Rice has still got his arm all clubbed up. So does Cedric Wood. I did see
Kalen LeBourne got to run a little bit.
Yeah, this shows you just how dense I am. I actually filmed him walking around practice, and I filmed him in his rep with in the Knoll drill. And then Gene's like, you guys got any observations? And I didn't even mention that. Like, Kalen LeBourne's back taking live bullets out there at practice. It went like totally over my head. But he's got a knee brace too, obviously, but nothing to the level of Gabe Neighbors, is who we saw had a really it went from, good grief, it went from about 8 inches above his kneecap to his ankle almost. I've never seen anything that robotic almost. So maybe on Friday when we get to talk to Willie again, we'll ask him the status of a guy like Gabe Neighbors. But tempo is a big deal, man. It really was. Willie mentioned it once or twice in his comments to us, and then when Randy Clements was working with the O-line, it was, I think I counted that they did 4 reps, the 1-5 group segment, like the second team. They did like 4 reps in 38 seconds. And every time they were done, he's like, back, tempo, back, and just, they were going quick. So I wonder how encouraging that is, because Greg Fry never got to that point, because I think he was just so drowned by what was going on around him that it was, let's just focus on getting things right. That maybe it's an encouraging sign that Randy Clements is already ready to kind of push them to go faster and drill. So that'll be my my cup of Kool-Aid I offer to you folks on YouTube right now. Ira, thanks for your time, my friend. We're done here.
Can I promote a couple stories I've got coming?
Absolutely. I was going to ask you. I know you're at the Insider Report out there, but what else should we expect out of you between now and tip-off tomorrow night?
Yeah, put up an Insider Report, just a notebook earlier today, and then I've got a story on the defensive matchup that we talked a lot about. A lot of comments from FSU's players, and kind of looking historically at what Leonard Hamilton's defenses do against really good post players, which Gonzaga has several. And then I'll be coming back tomorrow on game day with a story kind of looking at this whole 18 strong thing, but from a little bit different perspective, the kind of how they do it, and it was actually at this game a year ago after the game when Mark Few, Gonzaga's coach, who made the comment that, it's really hard to do what they do in terms of keeping that many guys like interested and engaged. So that's kind of what that story is going to be about, is how they do it. How do they keep all of those guys, even guys who aren't playing? And I'm not necessarily even talking about the walk-ons at the end of the bench. I'm talking about the guys that, the Polites and Wilkes and PJ Savoy and guys like that who see their role change during a season, sometimes not know what the role is, but then be ready when numbers called. And it's kind of an interesting approach that, I think Leonard Hamilton really stems back to his days at the University of Miami. And, with the theory that, he wasn't going to beat his 1 through 5 wasn't going to be as good as Georgetown's or Syracuse's or St. John's, but from 1 to a 10 or 11, maybe he could compete. And he took the same thing to the ACC. And, I think we're seeing the fruits of that labor.
Yeah. Last thing for me, it's totally understated, and I don't grasp it because I never played basketball at a high competitive level, but to have that many guys that are that talented to buy in and like Mark Few said, and like you're sort of intimating towards, just to keep them engaged, and then when it is their turn, they're able to produce. He makes it look easy, and it's really incredible. It's amazing.
Yeah, one of the things, and Stan Jones mentioned this, and I think it really is a key to it, that and we talked about this a little bit yesterday. I talked with Corey, just that it's guys that even if they're not playing, he and his coaching staff are constantly communicating with them about their development and what they've got to improve on. Because I think there's a tendency for a lot of coaches to look at the guys at the end of the bench who aren't contributing and kind of push them aside and just focus on, okay, who are the guys that are going to help me win games this season how many of the guys are going to help me win games this week or this month, and kind of push those guys to the side. And they've done a really good job of not doing that. And I think Stan Jones said, from an altruistic standpoint, they don't want to, process kids. They want to keep kids and they want to mislead kids, and they want to believe in them and help them get to be as good as they can be. But from another standpoint, it's smart because you get more out of these kids, and a lot of times they develop, and you're not just, constantly shuffling the deck every year or two because you're bringing in kids, they don't do well, and you process them out and you have to start over again. A lot of times these guys are developing and you see the fruits, down the road.
Yeah, man. All right. So again, lots to expect out of Ira Schoffel. He's in Anaheim, California. He will be there for as long as need be, hopefully through the weekend, and then we can I'll look forward to Minneapolis. Ira, thanks for your time, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Take care.
Folks, use the promo code WarChant30 if you're not a member of WarChant.com, the ultimate Seminole sports source, and stay connected to WarChant on social media, WarChant on Twitter, also on Facebook, and we'll talk to you folks later.